Park Roy was once known as a mischievous student, always getting into trouble and often punished by teachers, sometimes even forced to hold a bucket of water over his head. But beneath that playful exterior, he had a kind heart. Unlike Gwon, the notorious Jinwon, who was cruel and frequently bullied classmates. Jinwon was the son of a powerful tycoon, so no one dared to challenge him. One day, Jinwon began tormenting one of Park Roy's friends. Seeing this, Park Roy couldn't stay silent, despite his friend Sua warning him, "Don't interfere. If you offend Jinwon, your whole family could suffer." Roy stood up anyway. He confronted Jinwon, right there in front of the entire class, leaving everyone stunned. Humiliated, Jinwon provoked Roy further and challenged him to a fight. Just as things were about to escalate, the teacher walked in. But even in the teacher's presence, Jinwon continued to harass Roy's friend, the teacher. Fearing the tycoon's influence, turned a blind eye. Jinwon kept provoking Roy until he snapped. Park Roy struck him. What he didn't realize was that his actions were about to put his entire family in danger. At the time, Roy's father worked for Jinwon's father's company. News of the incident quickly reached the top. Roy was beaten by the vice principal, humiliated, and used as an example. Meanwhile, the school's principal bowed in apology to Jinwon soon after. Roy's father was summoned by Jinwon's father, the chairman of the company. The chairman seemed reasonable at first, acknowledging Roy's father's years of service. He didn't want to expel Roy or send him to prison, offering leniency. Roy's father was relieved until the chairman demanded that Roy kneel and apologize to Jinwon. But Roy refused. "My father taught me never to lower my dignity," he declared. The chairman's face turned red with rage, but unexpectedly, Roy's father smiled with pride. He was proud to have raised a son with such integrity. However, that pride came at a cost. The chairman fired Roy's father on the spot. Roy, guilt-ridden, could do nothing but clench his fists. The father and son went to a tavern that night over drinks. His father comforted him, saying, "I'm happy to see you grow into a righteous man. As long as we are upright, we have nothing to regret." They laughed together, unaware that tragedy was waiting around the corner. The next morning, a notice appeared. Park Roy was expelled. Now the father had no job and the son had no school. With their savings, Roy's father opened a small restaurant. Sua, ever supportive, frequently visited. But soon things took a darker turn. Jinwon, who also liked Sua, was jealous of Roy. One day, Roy's father was out on a delivery when Jinwon, driving recklessly, crashed into him from behind. The accident sent Roy's father off a mountain. He died instantly. Roy was devastated. The man he admired most was gone. As he mourned, the police came with shocking news. The perpetrator wanted to settle the matter privately. To Roy, this was an insult to his father's memory. Then came a twist. Sua, picking up some documents, noticed a photo of Jinwon's car. The license plate matched. It was clear the real culprit was being protected by the tycoon family. Enraged, Roy stormed off to confront Jinwon. That night, under pouring rain, he found Jinwon in a hospital garden. Seeing Roy, Jinwon panicked and fell. Roy, consumed by grief and rage, attacked him. "My father meant everything to me," he shouted, beating Jinwon unconscious. Just as Roy was about to strike him with a rock, Sua arrived with the police, guns drawn. The officers demanded Roy drop the rock. One even cocked his weapon, but Sua pleaded, "Your father wouldn't want this." Slowly, Roy calmed down and let the rock fall. The police stood down, but justice still escaped him. Roy was arrested at the detention center. The chairman visited. "Apologize. Kneel, and I'll forgive you," he said smugly. Roy responded coldly, "The one who should kneel is your son." Furious, the chairman left and immediately plotted revenge. Learning that Sua was close to Roy, he summoned her to his mansion. Knowing she couldn't afford college, he tried to bribe her into testifying for his son. "How much are you offering?" she asked coldly. The chairman laughed, amused by her defiance. Meanwhile, Jinwon, now regretful, wanted to confess, but the chairman wouldn't allow it. "You're the heir. You must stay clean," he said sternly. To toughen his son, the chairman took him to a farm, handed him a chicken, and demanded he kill it. Reluctantly, Jinwon obeyed. The chairman watched, laughing wickedly, pleased with his son's descent into cruelty. Soon, Roy's trial began. The verdict: 3 years in prison for manslaughter. But the chairman wasn't done. He had even killed the man they hired to falsely confess, pinning the blame entirely on Roy. One honest police officer knew the truth, but was powerless. The police director had been bought and ordered silence. And so Park Roy's life took a tragic turn, punished for standing up for what was right, while those with power buried the truth. Roy's first day in prison was anything but ordinary. The senior inmates tried to assert dominance, forcing him to kneel. But instead of submitting, Roy just laughed loud and fearless, throwing everyone into confusion. What they didn't know was that the whole thing had been orchestrated by the chairman himself. He'd bribed these prisoners to beat Roy down, but Roy wasn't the kind to break so easily. Not long after, Sua came to visit. Her eyes widened in shock at the sight of his bruised, battered face. Guilt weighed heavy on her. She couldn't hide it any longer. With tears threatening to spill, she confessed everything. She had betrayed him, taken the money to pay for her education. But Roy didn't flinch. He didn't blame her. Instead, before parting, he looked at her with the same unwavering calm and said, "I really like you, and when I get out, I'll find you." Those words hit hard. Sua, holding back tears, whispered her wish that one day, Roy would rise so high, he'd be powerful enough to get revenge on the tycoon who destroyed his life. They said goodbye, not with sorrow, but with a promise. From that moment on, Roy held on to one thing, his burning resolve to take down the Dijanga group. 3 years flew by, and today, Roy finally stepped out of prison. He was no longer the same young man. He was sharper, stronger. During his time behind bars, he'd built connections, including with a legendary gangster who saw something special in him. But Roy's first stop, not revenge. He returned to the place where his father used to work, a quiet pub, now echoing with memories. There, he whispered to his father's spirit, "I swear, I will make them pay." Roy wasted no time. He began digging, collecting every shred of information about the Dijanga group, tracking their rise, and more importantly, keeping tabs on Jinwon. With the address Sua had once sent him, Roy arrived at a vibrant street called Itaewon. Coincidentally, a local festival was in full swing. Music, laughter, the air buzzing with celebration. He stood there momentarily overwhelmed until out of nowhere, Sua appeared and threw her arms around him. Roy was stunned, frozen for a moment, before smiling wider than he had in years. They sat down for drinks, catching up between stolen glances and unspoken emotions. She told him she was now working at Jinwon's family company. Roy, ever composed, didn't hold it against her. Then came the surprise. He revealed that he'd signed up to work on an ocean ship, and he'd be gone for 7 long years. Sua's smile faded just a little, sadness settling in her eyes. They had only just reunited, and now they had to part again. But there was hope too, because this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of Roy's comeback. The very next day, Roy boarded the massive ocean liner to begin a brand new chapter in his life. 7 years passed like a whisper in the wind. During that time, Sua had climbed the ranks within the powerful Jenga conglomerate, becoming a respected figure in the company and earning the admiration of the chairman himself. But for all her success, one thing never changed. Her heart still belonged to Roy. Even though Jinwon had been flirting with her for 7 years straight, she never once gave in, because deep down, she was still in love with Roy. One evening after wrapping up work, she rushed toward Itaewon Street, place where she and Roy had once made a heartfelt promise. And just like a scene from a dream, there he was, Roy, waiting under the streetlights just as he said he would. Her eyes sparkled with disbelief and joy. She never imagined that Roy's casual promise to open a restaurant would actually come true, but it had. His restaurant, Dom Bomb, was finally open. Today was its grand opening and the energy was high, but strangely not a single customer walked in. Hours passed. The chairs remained empty, and all Roy could think about was the expensive rent on Itaewon Street that now loomed over him like a dark cloud. Meanwhile, just outside Itaewon High School, a group of girls was busy bullying someone, but they messed with the wrong target. Today, Yo, a bold, defiant girl with no patience for nonsense. She whipped out her phone and began live streaming the incident. Within minutes, the clip went viral, making her an online sensation. But fame came with trouble. Soon after, one of the bully's mothers stormed in to confront Yo, ready to create a scene. Just as the tension boiled over, the woman raised her hand to strike, but Roy stepped in, stopping her cold. Yo, never one to miss an opportunity, used the moment to slap the woman right back. Roy, confused by the chaos, chased after Yo and demanded she apologize. In classic Yo style, she lied through her teeth, saying, "My dad died because of her." Then she peeked back around the door, mocking Roy with a mischievous grin. "You believe that, you idiot." It was clear now Yo was just as stubborn and rebellious as Roy had been in his youth. Even the school principal couldn't control her, no matter how angry she got back at Jenga Corporation. Gonan was presenting a flashy plan to open a drinking bar on Itaewon Street, but Sua, sharp as ever, immediately objected. The chairman agreed with her, ripping the proposal in half and slapping Gonan across the face for good measure. It turned out the Itaewon store had been bleeding money for 3 months. In a bold move, the chairman handed over all the failing Itaewon properties to Sua for management. Furious and humiliated, Gonan confronted Sua later and issued threats, but Sua wasn't one to back down. She snapped right back. "Are you even sure you're the heir? Because the chairman has a secret son out there." That secret son, none other than Yuo's best friend. Later, Yonan and Yuo took a motorbike out for a ride in Itaewon, but while trying to avoid a pedestrian, Yuo lost control and flew through the air. Coincidentally, Roy was nearby handing out flyers. Seeing the accident unfold, he rushed to catch her, barely saving her from a painful fall. But the moment he saw her face, recognition hit. She was that same rebellious girl from before. Her friend rushed over to help, but caught a slap to the head from Yuo for the trouble. Roy tried to say something, but collapsed from exhaustion before he could get a word out. They rushed him to the hospital. The truth was, Roy had been working himself to the bone, trying to keep the restaurant alive. Back at the Jonga headquarters, the chairman caught wind that Roy had opened a restaurant on Itaewon Street. Sensing a threat, he ordered Sua to sabotage Roy's business. Caught between loyalty and love, Sua hesitated. Her feelings for Roy stirred in her chest, but the lure of money clouded her conscience. At the hospital, Roy finally woke up. Still weak, Yuo, ever blunt, criticized his outdated marketing methods. She suggested using social media for promotion, showing him how to gain more reach and attention. Roy took her advice seriously, thanked her with a sincere smile, and left, more determined than ever to turn Dan Bam into something big. That night, Yiseo and her two friends decided to check out the buzz around the famous Junga restaurant, and as expected, the place was packed, bustling with energy. But as they walked in, Siwa immediately spotted two minors among the crowd, and without hesitation kicked them out on the spot. Feeling awkward, the trio left and crossed over to Danbam, a small quiet restaurant right across the street, where they met Roy. And despite noticing they were underage and with no other customers in sight, Roy decided to let them in. Yiseo sat down and instantly understood why the place was empty. The restaurant looked run down and barely inviting. Meanwhile, Roy stepped out for a walk, hoping to learn how successful restaurants pulled in crowds. And on his stroll, fate made him bump into Sua, and he opened up to her, sharing how for the past 2 months he hadn't been able to figure out why Dambam was failing. Sua later dropped by the restaurant and immediately recognized that Yiseo's group hadn't reached the legal age, so she wasted no time and called the police. Back inside, one of Yiseo's friends was drunk and began treating the staff disrespectfully. Roy wasn't having it and stepped in firmly, telling the guy to behave, but the drunk teen got aggressive, grabbed Roy's collar and tried to punch him. Out of nowhere, one of Roy's employees rushed out, blocking the punch like a trained fighter, then struck the drunk guy with such force he collapsed. And it didn't stop there. The employee, clearly not your average waiter, poured a boiling hot pot right onto the guy's feet. It turned out this guy had a dangerous past, a real thug. That's when the police arrived, responding to Sua's call, and normally serving minors would mean a 2-month shutdown. Roy's business was in serious trouble, and things took a turn when Joon, the tycoon's smug heir, showed up to rescue his little brother. Laughing like a man who enjoyed crushing dreams, Joon took immense pleasure in Roy's downfall. The police, seeing Joon's status, tried to let him off the hook quietly, but Roy wasn't staying silent. He stood tall and called them out. Why let him go just because he's rich? Treat us both like guilty people. If you have any sense of justice, the officers didn't know how to respond. And Roy, disgusted, walked out of the station. Siwa chased after him, frustrated. Are you crazy? A 2-month closure will bankrupt you, she snapped. But Roy didn't care. He believed in doing what's right, and Siwa, in return, accused him of being too stubborn. Always clashing with the world, their argument got heated, and that's when Joon approached with a devilish grin, bringing up the past, the tragic death of Roy's father, and he tried to provoke Roy into attacking him again. But Roy, who had learned from his past, didn't fall for the bait, and instead calmly looked at him and said, I'll reopen that case. I'll expose what you did. You'll pay for what happened. Joon's confidence wavered for a second, and Yeseo, witnessing Roy's strength and integrity, was captivated and decided then and there she would help Roy take revenge no matter what it took. Because of the scuffle, Yeseo and Joon were punished at school, forced to run laps and write 100 lines of self-reflection. But instead of writing, Yeseo doodled a sketch of Roy. Clearly impressed by his vibe and courage, and her fascination grew. She began digging online, searching for details about the case that destroyed Roy's family, and even started passing by Roy's restaurant every day, even though it remained closed. A week later, the new year arrived, and as friends gathered to celebrate, Yeseo walked into a bar proudly flashing her ID. She was finally 18, but even as she drank, her thoughts weren't on the party or her friends or the new year. Her mind was on Roy, the man who'd stood up, fought for justice, and unknowingly left a deep impression on her heart. One evening, Roy unexpectedly ran into Sua at a familiar shop, completely unaware that she was the very person who had reported him to the police, which led to his restaurant being shut down for 2 long months. Ironically, he was so relaxed around her that he nearly confessed his feelings while they shared drinks. As the night wore on, Yeso decided it was time to head home, but as she stepped out, things took a dark turn. A creepy man she'd met earlier at the bar followed her, clearly drunk and now aggressively making a move on her. Yeso stood her ground and rejected him, but he kept pushing, getting more aggressive by the second. In a desperate attempt to shake him off, she threw some cash at him and told him to leave. But instead of backing down, the pervert felt insulted and struck her across the face. The situation escalated quickly as he continued hitting her, and Yeso, now frightened, ran blindly into a narrow alley for safety. She darted into the first place she could find, a men's restroom, only to stumble upon Roy again. He was surprised to see her there, but Yeso managed a brave smile despite her bruised face. Before either of them could process the moment, the pervert barged in, pretending to be Yeso's boyfriend, and tried to drag her away. Roy, though confused at first, instantly noticed the injuries on her face and realized the truth. Yeso looked at him pleading for help, and Roy didn't hesitate. He launched into the guy, fists flying, defending her without a second thought. After a short scuffle, the two of them made a run for it. Coincidentally, they bumped into Sua, who had just arrived. Now the three of them were running down the street together, and for the first time, Yeso found herself laughing, because somehow this chaotic escape felt thrilling. After escaping, Sua watched Roy fuss over Yeso and couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. As they all prepared to head home, Yeso paused and invited Roy out for another drink, wanting to thank him properly for stepping in during this moment. She also promised she'd help promote his restaurant on her Instagram to bring in some much-needed attention. While Roy stepped away to grab water, the real drama unfolded. Left alone, the two girls faced off in a battle of words. Sua, smug and confident, claimed that Roy liked her and that they'd had a connection for over 10 years. Yeso wasn't having it. She coolly responded that she liked Roy too. The conversation quickly turned sharp, each throwing jabs that made the tension thick. Then came the bombshell. Sua accused Yeso of being the reason Roy's restaurant got shut down. But Yeso, clever as ever, flipped the accusation and asked, "Wasn't it you who actually called the police?" That hit Sua like a thunderbolt. Her face showed the guilt, and Yeso looked at her with disdain, calling her out for betraying Roy. Sua didn't back down, though she admitted she had made the report, then smugly declared that no matter what happened, Roy would still choose her. But her arrogance quickly deflated the moment Roy returned. Sua tried to explain, confessing. She told the police because she thought Roy liked her and would understand. But Roy didn't react the way she expected. Instead, he calmly said he was disappointed. That single word hit harder than a slap. Embarrassed and out of excuses, Sua left them there. Roy and Yeso, now alone again, stayed behind and continued their drinks. At the restaurant, Yeso was on a mission. One by one, she pointed out everything that needed fixing from top to bottom. The decor was dull, the staff lacked training, and the menu was so bland it could put someone to sleep. But see Roy, sipping drink after drink, slowly let down his guard. He opened up, sharing everything that weighed on his heart. And in that vulnerable moment, something changed in Yeso. She started falling for him deeply. As the night wore on, Roy stood up to leave, swaying from all the alcohol, and suddenly collapsed right onto the ground. Yeso rushed to catch him, and in that blurry, tender moment, overcome by emotions she didn't even fully understand, she leaned in and kissed him passionately. The next morning, Roy woke up in a hospital room with a groggy head and absolutely no memory of the kiss. Meanwhile, Yeso confided in her mother, "I like a guy. He's in a rough spot and holds on to a lot of anger, but I just can't stop thinking about him." Her mother immediately cautioned her to back off, fearing she'd get hurt. Yeso felt torn, unsure whether to pursue him or let go, so she left it to fate. Flipping a coin heads meant stop, and to her disappointment, it landed on heads. But with a sly smile, she pretended it was tails and made up her mind. Full of giddy energy, she ran straight to Roy's restaurant. The moment she saw him again, her heart skipped a beat. Completely sure now that she was in love, she announced that she would become the restaurant's new manager and help him achieve the dream he'd once abandoned. Just then, another twist entered the story. The arrival of Junsu, the illegitimate son of the tycoon, thrown away like trash by his father and abandoned by his mother. He had lived like an orphan for years, but something about Roy's kindness inspired him, and he asked for a job at the restaurant. Now the small team of 5 was complete. Roy wasn't sure about the manager idea at first, but Yi-so was already in charge, pointing out everything wrong with the restaurant, starting with the staff, holding food with bare hands. "That's disgusting," she said. "And look at this menu. It's all over the place. No signature dish, nothing memorable. The restaurant doesn't even have a selfie spot. How are people supposed to post about it? And don't get me started on how the food looks. It tastes worse than it looks." Roy listened wide-eyed and deeply impressed. He immediately made her the official manager and told everyone to follow her lead. Meanwhile, at the corporate end, another drama was unfolding. The president found out that the female director had been buying up shares fast. If she kept going like this, she'd become the biggest shareholder and possibly dethrone him. Panicked, he rushed to confront her, asking straight up if she had plans to take over. Back at the restaurant, Yi-so was already making moves. She had a wall torn down to create more space. Then, using her eye for design, transformed the space into a trendy, beautiful spot where everyone would want to check in and take photos. It wasn't just a makeover, it was a resurrection. And this was only the beginning. The day Danbam finally reopened, Yi-so took matters into her own hands. She unleashed her secret weapon, her Instagram. With thousands of followers hanging on to her every post, she hyped the pub like it was the hottest place in town. And it worked. Within hours, people were lining up outside the door. The buzz was real, the energy electric, and inside the place was packed. The team ran around trying to keep up, but no one complained. Everyone was smiling. Even the normally stoic Say Roy was beaming with pride watching Yi-so work her magic that day. They raked in over 3 million won in sales. Meanwhile, not far away, the president was strolling down the street with Sua, surveying the neighborhood. He dropped a bombshell. "I want you to marry my son, Jin-won." Sua couldn't believe her ears and shot him a look that said, "Absolutely not." But the president wasn't done yet. He led her right to the door of Danbam. Seeing the crowd, he smirked and ordered her to do something to ruin the place. The sabotage was set. A few days passed, and Danbam was still buzzing with business. But trouble was brewing. The head chef was off, so Say Roy had to step into the kitchen. Even so, everything seemed to be going fine until the next day when complaints started rolling in. Customers finding hair in the food, others whining that it was tasteless. Tension flared. Yi-so, furious, confronted the fill-in chef and scolded her harshly, calling her out for slacking off in such a critical moment. She demanded that Roy fire her to protect the restaurant's reputation. But Roy, being Roy, called the chef in, gently pointed out the issues, and instead of firing her, shocked everyone by doubling her salary. His message: if you're gonna work here, you need to earn what you're given. Then he gathered the team and delivered an inspiring speech about unity and pushing forward together. It lifted spirits across the room, except for Yi-so, who stood quietly, disappointed that Roy hadn't backed her decision. The next morning, as fate would have it, Yi-so ran into a group of her old classmates, the ones who used to bully her. They surrounded her, full of sneers and cruelty, threatening to strip her and humiliate her right there in the street. But just as things were getting out of hand, Gonwoo appeared like a hero and stepped in, standing firm in the face of the bullies. He challenged their twisted behavior. In the heat of the confrontation, Yi-so had a realization. She had wrongly blamed Sua for tipping off the police, when it was actually one of these so-called friends. Furious, she slapped the girl across the face. Another classmate tried to intervene and caught a slap too. Just like that, the group panicked and scattered, confirming Yi-so's strength and showing just how far she'd come. Yi-so was just as stubborn as Roy, and in the days that followed, she often dropped by the restaurant to critique Heenie's dishes, which, believe it or not, actually helped Heenie improve her cooking skills. Steadily, Roy managed to settle the internal tension among the staff and brought the restaurant back on track stronger than ever. Meanwhile, at the pub, Sua sat alone, swirling her drink and replaying the president's haunting words in her mind. He had asked her to choose a side. The weight of it all pushed her to drink until she was completely intoxicated. On her way home, she coincidentally ran into Roy and his group. Seeing that this was turning personal, everyone quietly excused themselves. Everyone except Yi-so, who stayed back to watch. Overwhelmed by her emotions, a drunk Sua poured out her heart in a raw confession. Her glistening eyes and unguarded honesty caught Roy off guard, and for a brief moment the air shifted. The tension between them thickened, and just as their lips were about to meet in a kiss, Yi-so shot forward like lightning, shoving her hand between their faces and squashing Sua's mouth to stop it from happening. After all, she wanted Roy's lips untouched. Sua, stunned and sobered in an instant, tried to laugh it off but couldn't resist teasing Yi-so even more. She insisted on tagging along with Roy's group for dinner, and though it made things unbearably awkward, especially for Yi-so, Roy didn't have the heart to say no. During dinner, Suwa dropped some serious insights about the Jenga Group's massive success, saying it stemmed from their restaurant chain model and the fact that the president himself had crafted their signature recipes. Roy was instantly inspired. He boldly declared that he would turn Danbam into an even bigger franchise than Jenga Group. The team lit up with energy, glasses clinked, dreams soared, and a new fire ignited in all their hearts. Later in the bathroom, Suwa and Yeseo had yet another fierce showdown. Yeseo declared that she had oppositional defiant disorder and warned that she really liked Roy, so anyone who got in her way, she'd do anything to eliminate them. No rules, no mercy. But Suwa wasn't about to back down either. She looked Yeseo dead in the eyes and said that if it came to a fight, they'd fight to the bitter end. Meanwhile, at the Jenga Group headquarters, Suwa reported that Danbam had become wildly successful and that all the credit went to Yeseo's sharp management. She even dropped the jaw-dropping detail that Yeseo had an IQ of 162 and warned the president that Roy planned to expand Danbam into a full-fledged franchise chain. Hearing that the president started to worry, Danbam might just become Jenga Group's biggest rival soon enough. Back at Danbam, things were moving fast. The place was buzzing more than ever, and Yeseo began planning to bring in new staff and grow the business further. And instead of drawing a regular salary, she opted to take a 20% commission. Clearly, she wasn't just managing the place, she was betting on its future success. Unfortunately, Yeseo's mother discovered that she had dropped out of college to work at a bar and was furious with disappointment burning in her voice. But Yeseo stood firm. She told her mother she had fallen for Roy and believed in his dream. Even if she failed, she wanted to try her best to make something of herself. Their worlds collided, and no amount of words could bridge the gap. Heartbroken, Yeseo packed her bag and left home, tears in her eyes. As she crossed a bridge, feeling the weight of rejection. Just then, Roy came jogging by. Seeing her alone and sad, he instantly knew her mother had kicked her out for joining his cause. Filled with gratitude and guilt, he tried to comfort her in his usual awkward yet genuine way. And somehow his clumsy words made her heart lighter. They made a promise right then to build Danbam together, to rise to the culinary peak and become a franchise chain even greater than Jenga Group. Under the early light of dawn, they dreamed big as the restaurant began booming. It was time to hire more staff, but things didn't go smoothly. All the candidates who showed up were either unfit or downright bizarre. Just when they were losing hope, a stunning girl walked in. Roy and the others were all smiles, but Yeseo instantly rejected her, causing a wave of disappointment among the crew. Then came a tall black man named Tony, a Polish-Korean blend. Yeseo liked his vibe and hired him on the spot. Always thinking big, Roy contacted a TV station for an interview, and to his surprise, they agreed. Ecstatic, Roy couldn't contain his joy and blurted the news to Suwa during a walk together. They shared laughs and memories, but the moment wasn't so private. Jinwon saw them, and his jealousy erupted. He rushed home and tattled to his father. The president, upon hearing the news, he realized Roy was not just a dreamer, but a serious threat to their empire. Fearing Roy's ambition, the Jenga Group devised a plan to sabotage Danbam. The next day, Roy arrived at the TV station with high hopes, but shockingly found out that Danbam had been removed from the shoot, and standing there smirking was Jinwon. He had used his influence to kick Roy out of the lineup. Roy's heart sank as realization hit. Suwa must have leaked the info. Jinwon taunted him, declaring he'd ruin everything. But Roy looked him dead in the eye and promised to destroy their entire company. Devastated by the cancellation, Roy returned to the street, where Yeseo comforted him gently. Just as Suwa walked by Roy, without a word passed her coldly, leaving her shattered. Unexpectedly, Yeseo stepped in and revealed the truth. The person who called the police that night wasn't Suwa. Stunned, Roy bolted after Suwa. Determined to make things right, he caught up with her at the bus stop and gently grabbed her hand, apologizing deeply and vowing to crush Jenga Group so she'd never have to suffer again. The bus arrived and they parted ways once more. But this time, something had changed. Fire now fueled Roy's resolve. He immediately phoned a secret ally tracking Jenga Group stocks. The mysterious voice informed him his shares were now worth over 10 billion won. Without hesitation, Roy ordered him to buy all remaining shares of Jenga Group. The moment this news hit the boardroom, the assistant raced to tell the president Roy had been buying shares in silence. It turned out 8 years ago, after a massive scandal dropped the stock price, Roy quietly swooped in and invested. Now he was the third largest shareholder of Jenga Group. When the chairman heard this, he was shell-shocked. His laughter quickly spiraled into madness. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that the boy he tried to crush would become his biggest threat. President Jang stormed into Donbam Pub with confidence, expecting Roy to be nothing more than a naive, emotional boy, clinging to revenge. But what he found instead was a cunning strategist, a fox in sheep's clothing. 8 years ago, Roy had taken his father's entire insurance payout and used it to buy stocks belonging to the very company, run by the man who ordered his father's murder. Now the predator and prey sat face to face. Despite the heavy tension, Roy welcomed him with politeness, instructing his chef to prepare the best dishes possible. He even served the food personally, calm and composed. As the president ate, he dropped the bomb, asking why Roy had bought so many of his shares and what his true motive was. The room froze. Everyone around could feel the weight of the moment. Roy, not ready to reveal the full truth, casually lied that he saw potential in the group's future. President Jang continued eating, impressed by the taste. But he wasn't here just for food. He suddenly brought up Roy's father, trying to strike a nerve. He warned Roy to back off while he still could, threatening him with failure if he dared to go further. But the name of his father was a switch Roy couldn't ignore. His voice trembled with rage, and then, roaring like a storm, Roy declared his revenge openly. He promised to make both President Jang and Jinwon pay for what they did to his father. The temperature in the room dropped as Roy's fury filled the space. Jang's eyes blazed ready for battle. Just then, Yuseo realized how bold, talented, and unpredictable Roy really was. Roy then revealed that this was only step one of a grand takeover plan. His secret weapon, his loyal friend Hojin, the man Roy protected in prison when Jinwon tried to bully him. To repay the kindness, Hojin had been managing Roy's finances behind the scenes. A financial genius, Hojin turned Roy's modest investment of 100 million won into a fortune in just 10 years. And now, the real move was underway. Roy and Hojin had approached the CEO of Jenga Group with a bold proposal to overthrow Chairman Jang himself. The CEO, once supported by Roy's late father, agreed to work with them, moved by the desire to return that long-forgotten favor. But there was a catch. Roy's side needed more shares than Jang to make this takeover happen. A few days later, both parties met again and sealed the alliance with a firm handshake. The next morning, the director visited Jang at his home under the pretense of a friendly game of chess. During the match, she subtly warned him to consider stepping down and choosing a worthy successor, not just handing the throne to his son blindly. Once she left, Secretary Kim arrived with damning photos showing Roy and the director working together. Furious, Jang realized he was surrounded and started plotting a counterattack. Meanwhile, over at Donbam, Yasuo was slowly seeing Roy in a new light. She had always considered herself sharp, but even she hadn't anticipated just how smart, meticulous, and powerful Roy had become. Junsu, curious about Roy's past, asked Yasuo about his feud with Janga, but she didn't know the full story either. Determined, Junsu returned home and questioned his father, only to be berated and insulted for his incompetence. Jang raged at him for working with the enemy and offered no answers. Humiliated, Junsu left and called Yasuo, seeking comfort in that quiet moment. He confessed his feelings for her, but Yasuo, always clever, challenged him. "If you really like me," she said, "then steal the company from your father." The words stunned Junsu, leaving him speechless as if for the first time he realized which side of the war he wanted to be on. When the two returned, they saw Roy carrying her backpack and leaving, seeing that Yeso immediately gave up all her work to follow him. As best as she could, she stubbornly insisted on following Roy, finding Yeso too cute. Roy agreed to let her follow him. The two got on a bus to a small countryside. On the bus, Roy recounted her life, as harsh as hell. A little later, they went to the house of the former police officer investigating the accident that year. 10 years ago, he knew that the police chief had falsely accused Roy, but he couldn't do anything that day. He regretted it, so he resigned and went home to be with his wife. He regretted the unjust case, so he knelt down to apologize to Roy. He said that he would pay anything, even if it was his life, because his daughter was still young. He did not dare to confront President Jang, so did not blame him, but only advised him to be brave and strong. That night, it rained very heavily, so Yeso and Roy slept here. Yeso suddenly said that as long as the police officer testifies, Jinwon will have to go to jail, which means that Chairman Jang will be turned against by the shareholders. This is the key for Roy to be able to overthrow Chairman Jang. Looking at the scar on Roy's, Yeso knew he had gone through hard and miserable days, which made her love Roy even more. Yeso burst into tears and promised herself to protect this man all her life. But the enemy did not leave them alone to be happy. The next morning, the old owner announced that the house had been sold. They knew that the new owner had increased the rental price and the lease contract only had 6 months left, making everyone worried. Roy called the new landlord and wanted to negotiate. Unexpectedly, that person was Chairman Jang. Roy was surprised to find out that he was being played with again. Yeso knew about it and was very angry and scolded Sua to negotiate. Roy went directly to meet President Jang. Roy lowered himself and begged President Jang for concession of premises. Of course, a dangerous person like him could not ignore it. He said that wherever Roy rented space in the future, he would buy it back there to make it impossible for Roy to do any more business. Roy continued to lower himself and ask what he wanted. He wanted Roy to kneel down and apologize to him. Roy got angry and said he was the one at fault. He said that the more you harmed me, the more I become stronger. Then Roy made a strong declaration of war to President Jang. Then he coldly left. Roy went out and met Sua. She knew what happened and immediately asked the president to withdraw the decision to revoke the premises. But the chairman was upset and immediately kicked Sua out because the restaurant was about to close. The group went out to drink. When they left, Jonah apologized to Roy for the trouble his family had caused. Roy did not blame him and was still very sympathetic to him. The other 4 people invited each other to the bar to dance. Unexpectedly, it was Tony's turn to be prevented from entering. Here, there was a rule banning Africans. Tony asserted that he was Korean, but the security guards still wouldn't let him in. Yeso said no one would believe what the black guy said, causing Tony to sadly leave. Immediately the next morning, the bar was painted everywhere, writing that they were the ones practicing racism. Everyone who saw this scene didn't know what else to say. Joon confided in Yeso about his decision. He would quit his job, according to his father's wishes, to beg him to cede the premises. Yeso heard that and was extremely grateful. Then Joon resigned like that. The restaurant would no longer be troubled by Janga Group. Of course, Roy did not agree. He did not want anyone to sacrifice for him. While Yeso enthusiastically supported seeing this, Roy immediately snatched up her management sign. He angrily said Yeso was emotionless and not qualified to be a manager. She devoted herself to the restaurant but was scolded, so she also angrily argued back. Unexpectedly, Roy loudly scolded Yeso that he would not and could never exchange feelings for benefits. Yeso said she had given up her whole life for him, so even if he fired her, she would still be the manager of the restaurant. Hearing this, Roy was extremely surprised and decided to buy a house here for them to work. At the same time, Iso began to see the depth of Roy's gratitude, and it started to change her, no longer living just by logic, but by heart too. She immediately ran to Junu and apologized, and in that moment, Gonu, taking a chance, confessed his feelings for her. But Iso gently rejected him, saying her heart belonged only to Roy. Not long after, Iso posted an article online exposing the racism Tony faced, and it went viral, gaining massive support in the process. She boldly declared that if anyone dared to hurt Roy again, she'd fight them all head-on. Reading this, Tony was deeply moved and returned. Iso made him a promise that she'd help him apply for Korean citizenship. Seeing how much Iso had changed and how emotionally open she had become, the team felt a new sense of hope. Roy, proud and full of admiration, officially gave her the restaurant manager badge. But while everyone celebrated, Jin-soo stood silently, unable to hide his sadness. Elsewhere, the chairman's secretary revealed that Roy had just purchased property in Itaewon and that the value of Janga Group stock had skyrocketed in response. Roy, not one to be easily played, ordered to sell off all the shares, locking in a hefty profit. With that cash, Roy bought a large property in Itaewon, and the group came together to renovate what would be their flagship restaurant. But just as they were settling in, an elderly woman approached and warned Roy that every business owner who had operated there had gone bankrupt, casting a brief shadow of doubt. Still, to keep the momentum going, Iso started live streaming on social media, drawing massive attention to the newly rebranded store. Meanwhile, Chairman Jang, realizing that Iso was the secret weapon behind Roy's rise, made his move. He invited her to the Janga Group's press conference, and as the chairman boasted about their corporate future, Iso raised her hand and calmly asked whether there was any possibility another brand might overtake Janga Group. The room froze, and the chairman, offended, snarled that such a thing could never happen while he was alive, but Iso's fearlessness impressed even him. After the event, the chairman's secretary ushered her into a private room where Chairman Jang personally invited her to dinner at a 5-star restaurant. He praised her intelligence, noting her 162 IQ, and offered her a job at 10 times her current salary to work for Janga Group. but Iso refused. She said she might consider it in the future, but only after she helped build Danbam into a powerhouse. Hearing this, the chairman, though stunned, couldn't hide his interest. Roy was staying at Ho-jin's house, trying to sort out tax issues for their business expansion. Ho-jin came up with the idea to turn Danbam into a joint stock company. So Roy quickly held a team meeting where everyone agreed to rename the restaurant chain as Itaewon Class and form the IC Joint Stock Company. Just then, the former police officer and his daughter visited regarding Roy's old case. While the adults talked, the curious young girl spotted a stray cat and chased after it, eventually getting lost. The team searched everywhere until fate intervened. She ran into Director Kong, who kindly let her use her phone to call her father. The officer and Roy rushed over, but as a seasoned detective, the father noticed something suspicious. He turned around and caught a man who had been tailing them, stealing his camera in the process. They realized it was yet another setup. Chairman Jung had been secretly tracking Director Kong's movements. Meanwhile, the chairman himself saw the new Itaewon Class ad and realized Iso's full potential. Now he wasn't just afraid of Roy, but Iso too. His secretary then reported that their surveillance had been exposed. But the chairman remained calm and coldly said to ignore Director Kong for now. His main focus was to lure Iso into working for him. Hearing this, Suwa was stunned. At the same moment, the secretary informed him that the police officer who was helping Roy was their next target, and the chairman ordered him to be bought out. That night, under soft romantic lights, Roy met Suwa as she sipped quietly at a table, lost in her thoughts. With gentle honesty, Roy confessed he liked her, but the next morning at the restaurant, things turned sour. Iso confronted him, her tone sharp. If he was going to date Suwa, she would quit the job. Meanwhile, the powerful chairman Jang was moving his pieces too. He summoned the former police officer, yes, the very man who once helped Roy during his darkest days, and invited him to his mansion. There, the chairman laid out a tempting offer: leave Roy and sign a deal with the Junga Group. The contract was lucrative, the kind most would dream of, but the former officer had seen enough in life. He had a daughter now, and more than money, he wanted to be a father she could look up to. So he refused calmly but firmly. He even warned the chairman, if his family was threatened, he'd blow open the 10-year-old case. The case where Roy's father died. That made the chairman shift in his seat. Meanwhile, Jin Won, the chairman's arrogant son, sought out Iso and with flair announced in front of everyone that he wanted her to join Janga Group. Iso, always one step ahead, agreed to meet him for drinks back at home. Roy grew anxious. Something felt off at their private dinner. Jidwon laid out the golden offer, a position as marketing director with a jaw-dropping salary of 250,000 won a month. It was 50 times what she currently made. He thought he had won, but what he didn't know was that Iso wasn't just smart, she was brilliant. She played along, flattered him just enough, and slowly made him spill everything, especially the truth about the car crash that killed Roy's father. Jin Won, too confident and too careless, confessed it all, and Iso recorded every second. When he realized he'd been tricked, Jin Won panicked. He lunged for her phone, but Iso was quicker. In a desperate rage, he raised his hand to hit her, only to get a face full of hot coffee. Iso warned him coldly. Anyone who dared hurt Roy would have to go through her first. But Jin Won was no pushover. He slapped her and tried to wrestle the phone away. Iso screamed for help, and though people gathered, Jin Won had a plan. He threw a fistful of cash in the air. In a flash, the crowd scrambled for the money, ignoring Iso's cries. But just as things were turning dark, Roy arrived. Seeing Iso injured ignited something deep within him. He charged at Jin Won in a fury, but Iso pulled him back just in time. She knew this was the trap they wanted him to fall into. The police arrived moments later and took Jin Won away in that moment. With tears in her eyes and pain in her body, Iso felt joy Roy had saved her. She hugged him tightly, feeling safe for the first time in a long time. Later, Iso released the explosive recording online. It sent shockwaves through the media and public. Janga Group's stock plummeted. Chairman Jang, in a blind rage, beat his son Jinwon, whose pride shattered under the weight of the scandal. Watching this unfold, Director Kang made a decision. She couldn't serve a leader this corrupt any longer. She went straight to Roy Iso, now more determined than ever, explained with the chairman weak and the shareholders panicking. This was the perfect time to strike. But for the final blow, they needed the testimony of the former police officer. Only his words could officially reveal that Jinwon had killed Roy's father and bring down the man who had buried the truth for a decade. The next morning, Roy and his team rushed to the former police officer's house, but he was nowhere to be found. Turns out, he was desperately searching for his daughter. Director Kang found the girl sitting quietly on a bench, alone. It all made sense now. She had discovered her father's dark past, his mistake in Roy's case. from 10 years ago. He had left their home out of guilt. When Roy saw the broken bond between father and daughter, he couldn't bring himself to ask the officer for a testimony. Not yet back at the restaurant, Aizo stepped in with a plan. She revealed the second condition needed to bring down Chairman Jang. They had to catch him defending Jinwon's wrongdoings. At the same time, Chairman Jang was deep in strategy with his lawyers. Suwa, sharp and observant, offered bold advice: send Jinwon to prison and save the company. If Director Kang turned against him, he'd be voted out. But what she didn't expect was the chairman's response. Without hesitation, he said he'd rather lose the company than abandon his son. Suwa wasted no time. She raced to report this to Roy and Director Kang, believing they had won a massive victory. Confident, Director Kang called an emergency internal meeting and proposed the chairman's dismissal for letting personal feelings endanger the company. But she didn't realize she had walked straight into his trap. The next morning, the shareholders' meeting began. The tension was high. Everyone was ready to vote Chairman Jang out, but suddenly Mr. Jang stood calm and cold and revealed the truth. He admitted everything about the old case and announced that he would send his own son to prison, all to protect the company. The entire board was stunned. With one calculated confession, he dismantled the case against him. Director Kang sat frozen. She had been played like a pawn. Meanwhile, the chairman's loyal driver escorted Jinwon to surrender. But as soon as they arrived, Jinwon panicked and bolted. He ran straight to his father's press conference where cameras were flashing and the world was watching. That's where he realized it. His father had sacrificed him to save his empire. Standing there, betrayed the son shed bitter tears, while Chairman Jang walked off expressionless. Back at Danbam, Roy watched the news in despair. Their entire plan had collapsed. The chairman even called Director Kang to mock her, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Trying to bring me down? You're still too green. He then demoted her to a low-level branch office, crushing her spirit. Now Roy was their only hope. The next day, the long-awaited trial began. Jinwon was found guilty for killing Roy's father and sentenced to 7 years in prison. But even with that verdict, Chairman Jang remained composed, because to him, the company was everything. After the trial, Roy went to his father's grave, 11 long years, and finally, justice. He poured his father a glass of soju, just like they used to drink together, but the soju tasted just as bitter as the day he lost him. Back at Danbam, Junsu decided to quit. With his brother in prison, he wanted to go home and reclaim his inheritance. Izzo had once said she'd give him a chance if he could take over Jenga, but things were never that simple. Suwa arrived with shocking news. Chairman Jang had revoked all of Jinwon's shares. That betrayal sent Jinwon into a spiral. He had never expected his own father to turn on him. Meanwhile, Ghana returned too. He approached his father with a deal. He'd obey every word as long as he inherited Jenga. His burning ambition impressed the old man. Finally, the chairman agreed. But first, he transferred Suwa to a new role. She would be responsible for training Junsu to become the best. Meanwhile, over at the restaurant, even the chef went so far as to get plastic surgery, preparing for the spotlight that was soon to shine on them all. As the team prepared for the big cooking show, Tony got a little too carried away and accidentally added curry powder to the dish instead of the usual spices. Hee-wai noticed immediately and screamed in horror. But fate had other plans. That mistake turned into a masterpiece, creating a bold new flavor no one expected. The result? Danbam's curry dish won first prize, instantly catapulting the restaurant's reputation. Investors started circling, smelling opportunity. They wanted in. Danbam was hot. This was the moment to build a franchise empire. Yeso, sharp as ever, realized this and immediately compiled a detailed franchise guidebook outlining everything that made Danbam special. She was ready to bring in the big players. But Roy, he wasn't so sure. He felt it wasn't the right time. Tensions rose. Yeso saw the golden opportunity slipping away, while Roy feared moving too fast. But even Hojin agreed with Yeso's vision. Meanwhile, investor calls were blowing up her phone. If Danbam didn't act now, they'd invest in someone else. With the pressure mounting, she dragged Roy to the rooftop and unloaded her frustrations. Finally, Roy gave in. He decided to take the leap with Yeso by his side. Little did they know this was all part of Chairman Jang's trap. The duo met with a slick, talented investor, impressed by Danbam's young and fierce manager. He was all ears. Roy boldly demanded 5 billion won for the franchise rights. Yeso hesitated. It was a huge gamble. But shockingly, the investor agreed on the spot. The news exploded. Calls came pouring in. More than 10 billion won in funding flooded in within a single day. and over 50 locations registered to open. Danbom was no longer just a pub, it was now a national brand. They launched a representative office to handle business expansion and franchise training. On their way back that evening, the group stumbled upon an injured elderly woman and rushed her to the hospital. Fate had another twist in store. That woman was Tony's grandmother. When she saw a photo of his father, she broke down. Her long-lost son had died in a traffic accident years ago. Tony, overwhelmed, tearfully embraced her, finally reunited with family. The next day marked round 2 of the national food competition. Danbom prepared their iconic soft tofu soup, while Janga served their fermented soybean stew. Joon, having tasted both, knew immediately Janga had no chance. Sure enough, Danbom won again, sending waves of joy through Roy's team, while leaving Janga's crew in despair. Later that evening, Roy invited Sua and Yeso to celebrate. Sua took Roy's arm possessively, triggering Yeso's jealousy. Tension crackled. The group, already tipsy, decided to play truth or dare, and of course, Yeso had to go first. Gunu leaned in and asked if I win, "Junga, will you love me?" Backed into a corner, Yeso reluctantly nodded. Then it was Roy's turn. Squaw Never, the stirrer, asked Roy what he felt for Sua. Without hesitation, Roy replied, "I like her." The answer hit Yeso like a punch to the gut. Gunu pushed harder, and "What's Yeso to you?" Roy, with barely a blink, replied, "Like a younger sister." That shattered her. All her sacrifices, her dreams, her love, it felt meaningless now. Humiliated and heartbroken, Yeso stood up and left. Roy, prompted by Hai, chased after her. She turned to him, tears streaming, finally breaking down. "I love you," she sobbed. "I've given up everything. College, my mother, my life for you. I love you more than anything in this world." But Roy's response, cold and final. He rejected her, no soft landing, just heartbreak under the falling snow. Yeso walked away, alone and shattered. The man she vowed to protect with her whole life had broken her heart again. She collapsed in the middle of the street, sobbing uncontrollably. Love, loyalty, and dreams, all buried in the cold winter night. Returning to the powerful halls of Janga, company president Jang was fuming. Steam practically rising from his ears after 2 humiliating losses in the cooking competition. His patience snapped. He slammed his fist on the table and declared, "If we lose the final round, Gansu will never inherit this company." Those words hit like a sledgehammer. And Gansu, without missing a beat, stepped forward, eyes fierce. He begged for one last chance and swore on everything that he would win the final round. Meanwhile, over at Danbam, things were thriving. Customers flooded in, business was booming. But Yeso quietly decided it was time to step away for a while. Not out of anger, not out of defeat, but to give Roy space to truly understand his heart without her right there always guiding him. Junsu saw an opportunity and ran straight to his father, reporting Yeso's resignation. President Jang's eyes lit up with sinister delight. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. The very next morning, Roy arrived at the office to a haunting silence. No staff, no partners, the place was empty. And then came the gut punch. Investors bombarded him with messages. They were pulling out one after another. The entire group spiraled into crisis. More than $1 billion had already been poured into the expansion, gone in a flash. It turned out the earlier investor who appeared too good to be true was actually a plant from President Jang, a trap. And Roy walked right into it. Now, 50 franchise owners stormed into Danbam, furious, demanding compensation. Money was lost. Tempers flared. Chaos erupted. Sua, acting on President Jang's orders, entered with a smug smile and a bouquet of flowers, with a card that read, congratulating Roy on returning to the Golden Stream. It was a taunt, a slap to the face. Roy was livid, but even in this moment, he stood tall and with fiery determination, he addressed the crowd. "You can cancel the contract if you want. I will pay everyone back, but business isn't just about money. It's about trust. If you still trust us, please stay." His words cut through the tension like a blade. Some were moved, but the biggest question remained. Where would the money come from? Now Sua tried to tempt Roy with dreams of running away and living happily ever after. But Yeso, she called him, her voice full of strength and belief. She told him not to give up, to fight, and that she would stand beside him no matter what. And just like that, Roy found his fire again. The next day, Yeso returned, and with her, the spirit of Danbam roared back to life. The priority now? Find a new investor on their list was a surprising name, a 70-year-old real estate tycoon and none other than Tony's grandmother. The formidable woman, once an ally of President Jung, now potentially Roy's salvation. She arrived at Danbam with director Kang in tow. When asked if Roy needed help, he stood tall, but silent, too proud to ask for it. Her response was immediate. She scolded him harshly for being arrogant and blind to humility. She stormed out furious, and even director Kang left disappointed. That night, Roy watched his team work tirelessly despite everything they had lost. Despite all they'd endured, he realized they were still fighting because they believed in him. His pride wasn't worth their pain. So he called Tony and asked to meet his grandmother. Tony told him she was on Jeju Island. Roy called immediately and, to his surprise, she answered, barking into the phone, calling him a fool. He swallowed his pride and asked for her help. She agreed on one condition: win the final round of the best restaurant competition and she would invest. Roy made a bold promise. He would win. But destiny had other plans. At Gunu, hungry for the throne, was plotting. He knew Donbom's secret weapon, Chef Yoni, and in a move dripping with malice, he and Sua schemed a scandal. They would publicly reveal that Chef Yoni was transgender. A vile move calculated to destroy Donbom's image right before the final battle. The next day, Roy arrived at the competition alongside Chef Hyoni. But chaos had already erupted. The internet was ablaze with scandalous headlines. The news of Hyoni being transgender had been leaked everywhere. Sua, horrified, rushed over and showed the article to them, her face tense inside the studio. The murmurs turned into judgmental whispers. The crowd's stares pierced like knives. Hyoni's spirit cracked under the weights. She turned and walked out shattered. It was Jeon-soo, the snake behind the curtain, who had bribed a journalist to release the article. Sua looked at him in shock, stunned that he'd stooped so low. Meanwhile, Hyoni ran to the women's restroom, only to be chased away. Humiliated, she then hid inside the men's room broken. That's where Roy found her, curled in a quiet corner. And there, under flickering lights and echoing silence, he opened his heart. "If you give up now," he said gently, "they'll walk all over you forever. But if you stand tall and win, you'll crush every ounce of hatred in their hearts." Those words didn't just reach her ears. They lit a fire in her soul. Back in the studio, Jeon-soo smugly requested to start the show without Danbam. He was certain they'd backed out. But just then, the doors swung open, and Hyoni walked in, head high, shoulders firm, confidence radiating like the sun. Jeon-soo's smirk twitched. The battle began. Cameras rolled, flames roared, and living up to every ounce of expectation, Hyoni crafted a dish that left the judges stunned into silence. When the results came, the room held its breath, and then, announced loud and proud, Hyoni was the winner. The final winner. Danbam had done it against every odd. They'd taken the crown. A surge of joy rippled through the team, but in the cold tower of Jeonga, Group President Jong watched silently. He knew his son had manipulated the contest, but instead of scolding him, he praised him. "You used tricks well," he said with twisted pride. "Now you just need greater ambition to become the heir." Meanwhile, Yeso stormed into the company and slapped Jeon-soo across the face, hoping to wake him up. But the man she once knew was gone. He would do anything, to destroy Roy and claim Jeonga, even if it meant selling his soul. Heartbroken, Yeso ran back to Roy, because no matter what, only he could make her smile. With the contest victory secured, Roy and the team met with Tony's grandmother to seal the deal. This time, Roy didn't hesitate. He declared boldly, Danbam would no longer be just a Korean brand. He would take it global. And just like that, with the stroke of a pen, they signed an investment deal worth 30 billion won. The news spread like wildfire. Ganu stared blankly at the screen, the number burning into his pride. He turned to Sua and asked darkly, "How did you ever fall for Roy?" But he didn't wait for the answer. There was only one goal left: destroy Roy. His father, seeing the storm in his son's eyes, finally gave in. At the next board meeting, he announced that Jeon-soo would officially be the heir to Jenga Group. Thanks to lies and tricks, Jeon-soo rose quickly. The news made its way to his brother, locked in prison, who read the headline with clenched fists and burning eyes. He dropped the paper and began to train like a madman, determined to reclaim his place. Time passed. 4 years in a blink. Roy's IC company had become a powerhouse. Yeso, radiant and graceful, had grown into her own. Roy now stood as the general director of dozens of subsidiary companies. In the middle of a major meeting as board members voiced complicated problems, all eyes turned to him. But before he could speak, Yeso stepped forward with sharp wit and effortless poise. She addressed every concern in a matter of seconds, leaving the entire board in awe. After 4 long years of studying abroad, Gonu made his grand return. But he didn't come back quietly. With confidence in every step, he stood before the board of directors and unveiled his ambitious plan. He proposed buying a rundown road, transforming it just like Itaewon, inflating its value, and then flipping the property for hundreds of billions. It was bold, risky, but genius. The chairman, impressed by the sheer scale and strategy, gave his approval on the spot. Gonu had just proven his worth, and Mr. Young didn't hesitate to name him the one who would dismantle Roy's corporation and inherit the empire. Meanwhile, far from the boardroom, Joon, the eldest son, was released from prison, but the world he returned to had changed, and so had his father. Chairman Young's health was crumbling. Dizzy spells and fainting fits became the norm. Doctors had a grim diagnosis: terminal pancreatic cancer. But while everyone around him worried, Gonu had only one thought in mind: inheritance, cold, ruthless. He wanted his father gone. But Joon wasn't ready to surrender. After 4 years of training his mind and heart in prison, he returned with fierce resolve. He visited his father and boldly challenged Gonu's claim, stating he had memorized every one of his father's philosophies. "Janga must be mine," he declared, refusing to back down. Elsewhere, Roy met Sua for dinner, but mid-meal, a call from Hojin pulled him away. When he arrived, Hojin didn't hold back. He scolded Roy harshly. "You're the president of IC, and you're dating the director of a rival company. Have you forgotten your father's feud?" But that wasn't all. Hojin had more alarming news. Joon out of prison, and Chairman Jang, he's only got a few months left. Roy was stunned, shaken. With trembling fingers, he called the chairman directly. "I don't want you to die," he said. "You have to live, because I want to defeat you. Competing with you is fun." Those words struck deep, and for the first time in a long time, Chairman Jang laughed. Later that night, Roy returned to the office and found Yi-so asleep on her desk, completely drained. He gently draped his jacket over her. She stirred, touched by his kindness, and Roy found himself feeling something unfamiliar. Conflicted the next morning, the team gathered to confront the looming threat of Ganu's succession. If Janga fell under his rule, their future would be in jeopardy. Yeso had a plan: remove Ganu as CEO, install herself in his place, and shift the power she had: shares, influence, and a strategy. The team agreed. It was bold but brilliant. As Roy and Yeso stayed behind to discuss the final details, Sua called. She wanted to have dinner, but Roy, too swamped, declined. Yeso couldn't hide her jealousy and made a snide remark. Roy, irritated, snapped, "I don't see you as a woman." The words hit Yeso like a slap. Her face fell. Roy saw the hurt but stayed silent. She didn't need his apology. The pain said everything. And yet, Yeso understood. If those words affected him that much, it meant only one thing. He had started to feel something for her too. But Chairman Jang wasn't sitting idle. He caught wind of Roy's plans and began crafting his counterattack. Meanwhile, Yeso threw herself into work, meeting Janga shareholders day and night, trying to earn their trust. Her passion was undeniable, her brilliance magnetic. One by one, they began to lean in her favor, but she pushed herself too hard. So hard that one day her nose began to bleed. She was giving everything she had. On the other side of town, Roy met with Sua. She looked him in the eye. "Do you still like me?" she asked. Before he could answer, the door opened. Yeso walked in. Her heart sank at the sight. She turned and left. Devastated, Roy wanted to follow, but Sua held his hand, stopping him with quiet desperation. It was only later, too late, that Roy pulled away and chased after her. But by then, Yeso was already gone, returning home to her mother, heartbroken and defeated once again. The next morning, the long-awaited Jenga Group shareholders meeting was underway. Yeseo, despite being dangerously ill, pushed herself to attend. But just as the meeting began, her strength gave out. She collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Without her presence, her nomination as CEO was swiftly rejected. President Jang's faction triumphed without resistance. But Roy wasn't thinking about business. The moment he heard about Yeseo, he rushed straight to the hospital. There, lying in a hospital bed still burning with fever, Yeseo began drafting Plan B. Ever determined, ever relentless. Seeing this, Roy couldn't help but worry. He told her gently but firmly, "If you don't rest, I'll have to fire you." Then he turned and walked out. Squan, watching all this, chased after Roy and scolded him. "You're being blind again. You couldn't see through Sua. Don't make the same mistake twice." The words struck Roy like thunder as he walked alone. Roy spotted a necklace Yeseo had once admired. Without hesitation, he bought it for her. But when he returned to the hospital, his courage failed him. He didn't step inside, he simply stood at the door. Elsewhere, Janga's plot was already in motion. Gunu, cold and desperate, met with a local crime boss and slammed a duffel bag of cash on the table, hiring them to eliminate Roy and his team. Back at Donbom, Roy sat in Yeseo's place, trying to handle her duties. While opening her drawer, he stumbled upon something that stopped him cold. Her diary. Every page revealed her unwavering love, sketches of him, notes of her sacrifices. The truth hit him like a tidal wave. He had loved her all along but hadn't realized it. Without wasting another second, Roy bolted from the office and raced toward the hospital. At the same time, Ye Seo discovered the necklace. Her eyes sparkled with joy. Roy's feelings were real. Her heart fluttered with hope. But that moment was shattered when a fake doctor entered her room. Before she could react, darkness swallowed her. Roy reached the hospital only to find her room in shambles. Then his phone buzzed. A photo of Ye Seo blindfolded and tied. And a chilling anonymous message, "Come alone or she dies." Without a second thought, Roy tore through the streets, driving like a madman. Gunu, sensing something wrong, tailed him as Roy neared the rendezvous point. Deep in the woods, Joon, watching from afar, hatched a cruel new idea to take out both Roy and Gunu in one blow. He ordered a speeding car to plow into Gunu, but just as it lunged forward, Roy dove in and pushed Gunu to safety, only to tumble down a steep mountain himself as he lay bleeding, broken, and barely breathing. Roy thought of Ye Seo, of all the things he never said, of the love he never confessed. That regret burned brighter than any pain. Gunu, dazed and horrified, called for help, but Joon wasn't done. He sent men to silence both Gunu and Ye Seo for good. Gunu was knocked unconscious and thrown beside Ye Seo. Joon assumed Roy was dead, but just to be sure, he sent more men to confirm. Luckily, emergency responders had arrived just in time. Roy, though unconscious and with barely a pulse, was alive. They rushed him to the hospital. Meanwhile, no one knew where Ye Seo was. The retired police officer reviewed CCTV footage and confirmed it was indeed a kidnapping. But Ye Seo's phone was still receiving messages. If they went to the police now, her captors might kill her. Squan made a bold decision. He'd face them alone, while Joon was tormenting Ye Seo and Gunu in a hidden hideout. He spewed threats that made Gunu boil with rage, but Ye Seo, ever the fighter, only pretended to be terrified. The moment Joon left the room, she sprang into action, undid her restraints, and prepared her next move. At the same time, Squan tracked down the gang leader Joon had hired. He pleaded with them, reminded them of their loyalty, how they'd spent 10 years in prison with Roy. The gang didn't bite at first, but Squan, thinking fast, turned the tables and secretly called the police. In the end, his gamble paid off. The gang was arrested. The tide had begun to turn. Through the cold silence of night, Ye Seo worked tirelessly to cut the ropes binding her hands raw, her determination unwavering. As dawn broke, she finally freed herself and rushed to untie Ganu. Together, they scrambled to escape the place that had almost become their grave. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Roy lay unconscious. In his dream, he found himself standing on a mysterious bridge, the one between this world and the next. His father appeared beside him, gentle but firm. "If life gets too hard, come with me," he said softly. Roy's heart ached as he embraced him, tears in his eyes. But then he remembered. He owed Ye Seo too much. He couldn't leave yet. With one last look, Roy stepped away from the edge, and in that moment, he jolted awake. His fierce will to live had dragged him back from death's grasp. Tears welled up in Roy's eyes. Saying goodbye to his father, even in a dream, tore through him like nothing else. Somewhere else, Ganan was on the phone with his father, but unlike Roy, he wasn't grieving. He was raging. "This is your fault," he spat. "I've come too far to go back now. You broke me 5 years ago, and I'll make you pay for it." Ganan then revealed the location of the hostages, daring his father to show up. Chairman Jang was speechless, stunned by the monster he himself had created. Back at the hideout, Gonu and Ye Seo attempted to flee. Gonu ambushed Joon with a sudden punch, and Ye Seo was ready to finish the job. She wanted to beat him until she felt safe, but Gonu stopped her. They had to run. They dashed outside and scrambled into a nearby car, only for headlights to pierce the darkness. Gangsters had blocked the road. Surrounding them were Gonan and his men. At that same moment, Roy opened his eyes in the hospital, his body aching but his heart filled with urgency. He had to save Ye Seo. Sua tried to stop him, but Roy cut her off with a powerful declaration, "I love Ye Seo." Then, despite the pain, he stormed out. He raced to Chairman Zhang's house, demanding the hostage's location. "Tell me or I go to the police," Roy threatened. But the chairman wasn't so easily shaken. He made a cruel offer. If Roy would kneel, he'd give Ye Seo her life back. Pride clashed with desperation in Roy's heart. He hesitated, trembling. But in the end, for Ye Seo, he surrendered everything. He dropped to his knees. Chairman Zhang laughed maniacally. He had finally gotten what he wanted. Humiliation. He scribbled down the address and tossed it at Roy, who rose slowly, his voice cold and resolute. "You're no longer my enemy. The man who trades his own son for a moment of power doesn't deserve that title." With that, Roy turned and walked away, leaving the chairman seething in silence. Back at the hideout, the gang closed in. Yeseo grabbed a shovel, Gonup an iron bar. On the count of 3, they charged. But just before they clashed, Yeseo dropped her weapon and bolted, leaving Gonu to hold off the attackers alone. Fueled by his feelings for Yeseo, Gonu fought valiantly just as the boss moved in for the final blow. Junwon stopped him, a flicker of conscience still alive in him. Yeseo ran, her legs trembling, the pain sharp. The gang pursued her as she stumbled into an open field. The boss and Junwon circled around to cut her off. She ran desperately to the road, only to see their car racing toward her like a bullet. But just as the vehicle was about to strike, Crash Roy's car slammed into theirs at full speed. He had arrived, battered and bleeding, but just in time. Roy jumped out and Yeseo ran into his arms. But the threat wasn't over. Gonoob and the boss advanced. Roy begged the boss to walk away to consider their past friendship, but the man was unmoved. Seeing this, Squan, who had been watching, stepped forward. He volunteered to stay behind, buying them time. With grit and fury, Squan fought, taking down the gang members one by one. The boss proved harder, their battle fierce. Meanwhile, Junwon jumped into a car and chased Roy and Yeseo. After a few steps, Roy's legs gave out from the pain. Gasping, he turned to Yeseo and confessed the words he'd been holding in far too long. "I love you." She held him tightly, tenderly as they stood trembling in the middle of the street, surrounded by chaos, finally facing the storm together. Junwon slammed his foot on the accelerator, the car roaring toward Roy like a missile. But Roy wasn't backing down. With rage in his eyes and love in his heart, he grabbed a brick and hurled it straight at the windshield, shattering the moment and forcing Junwon to a screeching halt. Turning to Yeseo, Roy ordered her to run ahead and call the police. He, on the other hand, stayed back. This fight, this final stand, was his. Junwon had spent 4 long years in prison, training every single day. Roy, exhausted and still recovering, was no match now. Blow after blow landed hard. He was battered, bruised, but unbroken. Meanwhile, the boss and his gang were taken down by Sinan, the silent warrior, who still had mercy in his heart. Instead of revenge, he spared them, hoping somewhere deep inside they'd change. Roy, dazed and barely able to breathe, collapsed to the ground. But just as Junwon thought it was over, Roy's fingers dug into the dirt. A surge of emotion rushed through him for Yeseo. He couldn't lose. He rose like a phoenix, bleeding and trembling. Even Junwon paused, stunned by his will. With one final punch, fueled by love, fury, and purpose, Roy dropped Junwon, then collapsed himself. That's when Yeseo returned with the police right behind her. She raced into his arms, both of them shaking but finally safe. The nightmare was over. The very next morning, Shiwa, full of guilt and redemption, handed over every bit of evidence of Janga Group's crimes. The police stormed Chairman Jang's estate, charges of embezzlement, bribery, corruption. The walls closed in on him fast. His restaurants canceled, contracts one after another. Janga, once a mighty empire, crumbled into bankruptcy. Chairman Jang, now a desperate man, begged for help, but no one came. No one except the one person he never thought he'd need, Roy. As for Junwon, he was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison, his twisted path finally catching up to him. Roy, on the other hand, awoke in the hospital to the face of the woman he fought for. The first thing he did was wrap Yeseo in a hug. But then, a storm, her mother, furious, barged in, yelling at Roy for everything that had happened. Roy simply lowered his head and said, "I'm sorry." That was all it took. Her anger melted. Yeseo smiled. They left the hospital hand in hand, the past behind them, but fate wasn't finished yet. When they reached the restaurant, they found President Jang waiting. Roy, calm and resolute, entered the kitchen himself. He cooked the dish with his own hands and served it to the man who tried to destroy him. And when President Jang tasted it, he was stunned. It was more than food. It was talent, resilience, heart. That's when Roy made his final move. "I'm merging Janga into my company," he said, "and the name Janga will be erased forever." President Jang, the mighty tyrant, stood silently. Then he dropped to his knees. For the first time in his life, he bowed his head to someone else. "I've done many evil things," he whispered, "but in my final moments I ask only for forgiveness." Roy, once a boy with nothing, now stood at the top. He didn't smile, he didn't celebrate, he simply nodded. "I forgive you," he said, "but the merger will continue." Janga Group's era had ended not with a bang, but with a bowed head. Soon after the historic merger was complete, Roy officially became president, backed by every shareholder in the room. And John Soo, after everything Roy had done after saving his life, he gave up his ambition, turned his back on greed, and chose a new path of peace. Roy had come a long way from a young man with empty hands, a murdered father, and a shattered soul, to a leader, a fighter, and a symbol of hope. He had lost everything, but through strength, vision, and heart, he earned it all back. And now, happiness. He walked with Yeso that day under the soft evening light, hand in hand. No more battles, no more pain, just peace. Then, with all the courage in the world, he turned, looked into her eyes, and kissed her passionately, fearlessly. The war was over. Love had won. The screen fades to black. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.